Friends and co-laborers in child protection, it is a great pleasure to join you all here today. Heartfelt thanks to God and the Wild Without Orphans organizing team for having us all here. I spent my entire childhood in institutional care in Kenya. Trying to work this out. I spent my entire childhood in institutional care in Kenya, and by God's grace, He has me working in the child protection sector, advocating family-based care for Kenya's orphaned and vulnerable children. In that picture, the arrow is pointing at me. After a long and grueling 3 months of a school term, many children look forward to the school closing day. No waking up at 5 a.m. for a whole month. No early morning house or dorm cleaning chores. No more housework, as well as homework and the punishments that follow the next day if it was not done well or not done at all. At the orphanage, the holiday break had a lot to offer. It allowed children extended playtime, an opportunity to hang out with our peers, and we were kept engaged in fun and club activities such as arts and crafts, music, and games. Show me a child who would not want this for the holiday. To add to the list, it was a break from having to tolerate the all-so-common name-calling by our school teachers, who, owing to the characteristic identifiers of institutionalized children, such as a head scalp full of ringworm, having oversized school uniform, or not having snacks at break time, when all other children had a well-packed snack. For me and many other children at the orphanage that I grew up in, we dreaded school closing day and the holiday weeks that followed. Why so? It was because my 5 siblings and I got sent to our uncle for the entire holiday duration. And there was no saying no to this arrangement. And we missed out on all the holiday fun. At the end of each school term, my uncle, who was then a father of 8, would be given rations to take with him and utilize for our well-being. And this was a measure to cushion him from having to shoulder the costs of our upkeep and supplies. And for a good 11 years, brothers and sisters, my heart sank when I saw my uncle seated outside the orphanage main office, waiting for us on the last day of a school term, every thrice a year. I hated going to the rural areas and having to spend about 8 hours a day digging in his farm, which was not just for subsistence crops, like maize and beans, but also a lot of tobacco. Also, we went to the river a lot of times to fetch water. And 3 meals a day were not guaranteed, and the monotony of having porridge for breakfast and maize and beans for lunch and supper made me miss the bread and food that was provided at the children's home. I cried a lot when my uncle came to pick us. And on most occasions, I took my good time to pack my clothes. And as a result, I kept the family waiting to start the long journey to the central part of Kenya where he lived. On one such day, my uncle got so impatient and angry that he did something he rarely did. He walked to my room and angrily waved his walking stick at me, saying, "Swara wewe, utakwenda kulima." Translated in Swahili, it means, "You antelope, you will go and work the farm." And he added that no amount of crying or packing slowly will stop me from going home with him. For little me, this was pretty scary, traumatizing, and did not help to allay and dispel any fears that I had. And my siblings were equally not pleased with this arrangement, but since they were slightly older than me, they did not want to be laughed at by their peers, and they had to save face and put up a brave face instead. My uncle, God rest his soul, relied on herbal medicines for any ailments. And to this end, would be given a weed to chew as a panacea to whatever it is we were ailing from. Imagine with me, you complain of a stomachache, and a person you're seeking intervention from looks around him and uproots a weed, shakes off the soil from the roots, and asks you to chew the weed to get better. We had to say we were feeling better after one taste of the bitter weed to avoid having to chew it a second and a third time. I saw him purely as an authoritarian figure who maintained that women and children were there to be seen and not heard. And often, he would drink and be in stupor, becoming angry and very violent. He would beat his wife, my auntie, and get us all scampering for safety in order to avoid him. I recall an occasion where we had to spend a whole night in a granary. For those of you who have no idea what it looks like, check that out. It was used for storage of the harvest as well as farm implements and would be situated not so far away from the main house on the compound. And shelled maize served as a mattress for us that night, and the cold that penetrated through the walls of the granary made it very difficult for us to sleep. Not to mention the sounds of 2 creepy rats, which could be heard coming from 2 corners of the 6-legged, grass-thatched abode that we had checked in into for the night. And throughout the holiday duration, I remember I had a little hand-drawn calendar in my little bag, and every night I would cross off one day and count how many we had left before returning to the orphanage. Moving on swiftly. For my secondary schooling, I was taken to a boarding school near where another of my uncles lived. For what reason? To make it easy for him as well as his family to visit me and to check on me during my high school years. And this was expected that they would do so at least twice a term. The arrangement was a convenient one for the orphanage, but was particularly difficult for me since despite having 2 uncles, I was visited by one of them only once in the 4 years I was in high school. And most boys had families who came on visiting day in school. They brought picnics, and I would wander about the field where the families met. And graciously, some of them would ask me to join them. And I hated being the odd one out. It made me feel so aware of my status as an orphan. That's my story. But Charles's story was different. We was in the same orphanage, but he loved going to his uncle's place and dreaded coming back to the orphanage at the end of the 4 weeks. Some loved it and some dreaded it, but the rule was clear. We all had to go, since according to the home administration and social workers, it helped us not lose touch with our roots, and we were all made to fit into this one-size-fits-all rule. And some key recollection and facts for me. These same relatives are the ones my 5 siblings ended up getting taken back to. They were definitely not right for them at all. Some of the outcomes included dropping off from the village polytechnic 3 of them were enrolled into, and with the expectation that my uncles would be responsible for their care and ensure attendance. And this was despite the fact that they had grades that qualified them to join high school. The orphanage did not take them to high schools, but took them to polytechnics instead. My eldest brother Patrick's suicide in the year 2007 is another outcome. My elder sister's marriages to abusive men, and they had to run into these marriages because it was an escape route from having to stay at my uncle's place. And interestingly, that very uncle who used to pick us up from the orphanage when schools would close was responsible for selling off the only piece of property that my dad left as an inheritance for us. Upon completion of my studies, brothers and sisters in Social Work University at the University of Nairobi, I went to work back at the same orphanage I grew up in and served as a social work assistant and later as a head of social programs. And this is a role I held for 9 years before leaving to start the organization that I and the team run presently, known as Child and Family Focus. I was in awe of the Lord and so amazed by the remarkable transformation he would orchestrate in the lives of abandoned children, babies when they met the prospective adoptive parents, and the difference that they would actually show a couple of weeks or months later after placement. I loved listening to the children and to know what their needs were and how the team that I was leading could be best of service to them. And one of the programs we piloted was dubbed the Holiday Stay Program. And this entailed asking the children from the orphanage who their best friends at school were. And we would seek confirmation from their class teachers, after which then we would approach the parents of these friends. And to our surprise, the parents to these children knew more about the children from the orphanage than we did, courtesy of their daughters and sons. And many parents wanted an opportunity to be partnering with the orphanage in making a difference in the life of that child who was a friend of theirs. And after the requisite assessments, We, for a start, gave them an opportunity to host the child from the orphanage for about 2 weeks during the school holiday. And these relationships blossomed into lifelong relationships that were unique, with mentoring in the mix, sponsorships, as well as family relationships. And even the very relatives of these children would allow them to be with these families longer. In the course of my work, both as a family-based care advocate, brothers and sisters, as a consultant, and one supporting orphanages with the transitioning to family-based care, I have come across a quote by an unknown person that rings true to me. It rings true to my situation, and I believe to many orphan and vulnerable children globally. Dear friends and co-laborers in child protection, on the count of 3, please read this with me. 3, 2, 1. Just a second. 3, 2, 1. Family? Thank you very much. I can go on, but I hope the point is home. The family that has impacted my life the most, been there for me through hard times, stayed with me and prayed with me when all others left, was not related to me biologically. And that is a very special gift. The gift of family. It's a special gift from God who places the lonely in families. With the clamor for care reforms and the continued drumming of the global research finding that upwards of 80% of children in orphanages have at least one living parent, we must be cognizant of the fact that these 80% are in these facilities not of their own doing or will, and that the fact remains they are still children in need of care and protection. The separation from their families inflicted trauma on these children and cut off bonds that take time to rebuild. I agree that orphanages, even when delivered by well-meaning care providers, can never replace a family. But when the desire to transform or close orphanages runs ahead of the capacity of families to receive children, then children are often placed in dangerous situations. The ideal is family, yes, but the journey to the ideal is not a one-day affair. It's not a one-year affair. It takes time. The remaining 20% that are either abandoned, abused, or unwanted, or orphaned, and with no relatives to care for them, are still looked after by this same staff and orphanages that we so often demonize and point a finger at, in effect dampening their spirits and leaving them demoralized. Do you know the resultant effect that has on the 80 plus 20% of children under their care? Their care is hugely compromised, and rushed attempts to take children home ends up doing more harm than good. We must be cognizant of the contextual realities of societies and communities we are serving if we are to succeed in care reforms, brothers and sisters. And mitigating resistance from institutional directors and proprietors, staff and donors calls for continued engagement, sensitization, and understanding where they are at, where they are doing what they do, and giving them a seat at the table. Because generalizations are harmful, and we must avoid use of this language that is condescending and demonizing. In the country I come from, for instance, Kenya, the gravest deficiency of our children law is the complete lack of provision of a structure for family preservation services as a fundamental component of our childcare and protection system. The current system primarily focuses on alternative care, is very reactive, only coming into play after a child is separated from their family. And the result is that we have family disintegration that leads to flocking of children in the streets in their hundreds, while sprawling children's homes have increasingly replaced family. Those children that are lucky to remain within families are increasingly faced with the risk of severe neglect, abuse, and exploitation, as families reel under the weight of economic hardships and social disintegration. That is where prevention comes in, and we need to consider really prioritizing that. Nelson Mandela said that we owe our children, the most vulnerable citizens in our society, a life free of violence and fear. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, on the other hand, said that in the end, God will not hold us guiltless, because not to speak is to speak, and not to act is to act. Like many of us would do to our own children, let us listen to them. Let us know what they need. Avail opportunities for life skills and leadership development. As organizations that are working with the orphan and vulnerable children and churches, working also with young care experienced people, it is our duty to empower and support them to become strong, independent, and young adults that are engaging meaningfully in society. Let us not tire in giving them a second, a third, a fourth, and fifth chance. I implore us all to develop appropriate mechanisms to ensure genuine child participation in the process of reform and respect the fundamental right of children and young people to speak or to give their views in matters that affect them. I conclude with a prayer from Isaiah 11:1-2 for you all, that as we continue to intervene for the orphan and vulnerable children, that the Spirit of the Lord will rest upon you all, the Spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of might, and the Spirit of the knowledge of the Lord. As we do right for these children, that we will seek justice for them. We will encourage both the children and their families and defend their cause as God would want us to do, because there is surely a future hope for the orphan child. And as long as we continue to collaborate, as long as we continue to seek refreshment from the Almighty God, as long as we continue to intervene right and to prevent the separation of children from their families, there is surely hope for a world without orphans. God bless you.